What's up? And welcome to Perspectives. This is the show with end of the week collaboration where we go through the lives of interesting people such as Nathan Dufour over here, which is cool because this is the first time this has actually happened to me. I actually had the pleasure of talking to Nathan on my own stuff off of the end of the week thing, which is kind of super similar to exactly what we do over here. It just kind of works out to being the same thing. So for me, it's great because we had this amazing conversation. And I feel like it just like ended abruptly, and that was awesome. And so now we're like, you are on mute though, just to like put that out.
Yeah, well, because I was like I blocked out for like an hour for it, and then I was like, wow, okay, we can talk. Like it exceeded our conversational magnitude exceeded the allotted time that I had.
So with that, it's like really cool that Danny got you back here and he got us to be able to put in because I'm like excited for it. I love what you do. I like everything about your brand and the education form of content that you create. It's super entertaining and you are fucking good at the whole Instagrams and TikToks and stuff. Like you are crushing this social media game in a way where I'm sitting there taking notes on how you're placing stuff and whatnot. I'm super impressed by it all.
I appreciate that a lot.
But
And
yeah,
the appreciation is mutual. I appreciate what you're doing. I was actually just revisiting your music today, like knowing that we were gonna see each other, and I was really enjoying it. There was a line that I just before I forget I want to pull out that sometimes the allure is the snare. I just
mm,
want to put it out because it touches on the stuff that we're talking about with like, yeah, I'm starting to figure out social media a little bit, but it's a very double-edged sword. I feel that I'm being manipulated and manipulating even as I'm educating and being educated, which
yes.
is the same thing that happens in an educational institution, but it happens in a more troubled way, I think, in some ways with social media. But anyway, I'm not trying to dive into the deep end right away.
Nah, super wild. That you said that, I really, I appreciate. No one's quoted me like that before at the start or anything. That's really cool. So I appreciate that. But what you said is also just interesting because that is the big struggle. Like you ever think about how to optimize your content, and that's when you start playing with the devil a little bit. It's not the initial part. It's when you're like, "Ooh, I can do something here." You really have to think about it. All things considered, I already asked you my first opening question, but just because this is on this show over here, we're gonna run it again, and then we'll just kind of let the conversation flow. We don't. If anyone does want to go through the whole early part of Nate's life, we kind of touched on that on the Bridge the Gap episode we did, but we'll still, for the sake of consistency, run through the main opening little story question I do. Conversational kind of flow from there, however we want to go with it. So, as y'all may know, it starts out with my girlfriend. She's washing the dishes one time, and she's playing that Black Eyed Peas song, the I Got a Feeling. Ooh. She's vibing and she's dancing and she's doing her thing. And I look at her and I kind of have the impression of when the fuck did this song become chores music? Because, like, I remember vividly 11 years ago now, back then that song was on top of the world. It was in the middle of the night song. Everybody drunk dancing. It was kind of a representation of the greatest moments of people's lives. Happy vibes. And then all of a sudden, a decade passes by. The song doesn't change at all because it's a song and it doesn't really kind of change. But we evolved so much that the context of the song has evolved from party music almost to this thing where we're doing these boring tasks and we want to go back to those vibes and use the music almost as a crutch to get through the boring environment. And I just thought that was super nifty because I started thinking about the little ones as they're going around bumping whatever they're partying to, and they have no idea that that is the future soundtrack of their chores music. And they do not know that when I find the Pop Smokes and stuff, I start washing dishes to the Pop Smokes and stuff, and that's just how the nature of the universe be. And with all that, it kind of got me thinking about the stories of kind of us as musicians and everything, and just kind of how most of us kind of start our stories when we talk about them, most of the interviews and everything in the adolescent phase where people kind of just identify more with things. So like they get into hip hop more, or they get into this, or they start writing, or it becomes more tangible. And not everybody, but most people kind of start their story there. Even though when it comes to music, the story starts like way back in the beginning of time. As an example, like I can remember being like 5 years old up in Montreal, and like my dad would have all the great boxes in the apartment. He would have the speaker, the tape deck, the amps, the radio, the preamp, all the different things attached together with the wires going out to all the speakers and stuff. Be bumping his Led Zeppelins and various things like that in the daytime. My mom, at night it would be a bunch of EDM stuff coming straight from the clubs in Montreal. My mom's was more into, the romance music, the musicals, that kind of vibe of things. It was kind of what she kicked it with, and all this stuff kind of influenced me throughout my childhood before I had any control of anything. Even just growing up in the 90s, man, I got the 90s blend of pop music and all that kind of stuff. So with that, I was hoping you could bring us back to being the youngest Nathan that you could be, and let the end of the week folk out there know what it is for you when you were young, growing up. Also I forgot to let them know where you grew up, and kind of walk us through about the sounds of your childhood a little bit.
Great question. I'm from a little town outside of Seattle in Washington State. Shout out to any Washingtonians out there. God, I miss Washington. I love New York. Sometimes I wish that I could take all of my friends in New York and move to the woods in Western Washington. Like, that's what I maybe if I win a grant, transplant the whole East Coast hip hop and arts community to Washington. It's maybe not what everybody wants to do, but in any case, that's where I'm from. And so I grew up kind of in the woods, in a little rural town called Snohomish. And music wasn't as big of a part of my childhood as some other things were. My dad would sometimes listen to music, but on the radio or some of his records, but not that frequently. And my mom adores silence, almost categorically. She would almost always rather be quiet than noisy, and she just likes to be in that meditative space. She's a very talkative person, but she likes silence, so she's not really that into music. In any case, I don't have really early memories of music. My earliest memory of being really affected by music was, I guess, getting into punk music and stuff when I was in high school, which was kind of an evolution from pop punk kind of stuff, because I was sort of on the weirdo side of the spectrum of social high school politics, and so it came with that sort of musical genre attached to it. The earliest memory I can remember being shown music, though, is the one time my dad did show me music because he put on a Bob Dylan record, which was really pivotal. That's when I sort of learned. That's when I learned that I love the convergence of music and words.
That's interesting. The convergence of music and words.
Really fancy way of saying songs.
Nah, I'm with it, but it's more specific than that, right? Because some people might like songs, but if that's what really attracts you to it, the convergence of musics and words is a particular attribute of a song, rather than it just being the granular experience, or not granular. I use that word incorrectly all the time. The experience of a song. Still, if you weren't so much into music, though, what did take up your younger days? What was it? Your passions and stuff.
I've always loved spending my time being creative. I played sports and stuff like other kids did, but I was kind of always eager to get done with practice or the game or whatever so that I could go do creative activities. And the main one that I remember when I was really young was making comic books. I would make comic books, and then I would sell them in my room. I would turn my room into a store with my brother and my friend Matt Ernst, and we would just I was really into Calvin and Hobbes. That was one of my earliest influences. And so I had this comic strip called Jake and Nick, which was kind of like Calvin and Hobbes, but there was no tiger. Anyway, it was just these two characters, And yeah, that's my earliest creative memory.
So how big were your comics? Was it little strips he was hustling?
They were short. Yeah. They were and that's the thing. I was into comics, but not adventure comics or action comics. I was into cartoons. I liked the humor. I especially love Calvin Hobbes because it was very I learned new words from it. It was very philosophical. It's a really philosophical cartoon.
I'm gonna be real though. Calvin and Hobbes was extremely lit. I remember getting the books when I was young, and if somebody had a Calvin and Hobbes, you just got your hands on it and tore through it. But that whole
totally.
To be honest, I was kind of also the same. I never was really into the adventure comics. I was into the Garfield ones, the ones that were in the newspaper, and I was that kind of comics that I really fucked with when I was a kid. So I empathize a lot with that.
Yeah, it's really. I don't know if there's anything. I mean, there's a lot of Instagram comics and web comics and stuff like that that are similar in the sense that they're really profound and have that wit going on. But certainly there's no single, just juggernaut. I feel culturally right now is analogous to the role that Calvin Hobbes played in a lot of people's childhoods of around our age.
That's fair, but the median also changed too, right? Because that all came from us being exposed to the comic book section in the newspapers initially, and somebody would have it.
Right.
So we deaded the newspaper, and now we deaded the comic section, which kind of
Yeah.
blocked the distribution flow. Never thought about that before, but that's an interesting point. I do think though that like a bunch of people on Tumblr have filled that void for a lot of people, and I just never heard of any of them.
Probably. Yeah, yeah. But that's to your point. There is no center now where we're all getting the same thing. You know.
But so that's wild that you were hustling comics for cash and writing, creating your own little stuff, and
The cash was minimal, but yeah, the
bro,
productivity
like
was
if you're
substantial.
like super young and you make $10, that's wild.
True. Yeah, yeah.
You know,
It's great.
like
Yeah. With which you buy more comics, you know.
I mean that's just priorities at that age, but that's still incredible. So as you get into music, it's like punk stuff and whatnot. Is that just by virtue of what's hot around you, or is that more like you just got exposed to it in its own way?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it really was. I think first I listened to the radio kind of uncritically, and I liked pop music and rock and roll and stuff like that, and whatever was playing on the sort of pop radio station. And then I gravitated to the alt rock station, and that's pretty much how it happened. And then I got very like, I don't know, kind of purist about it really quickly. Like it was right around when like emo and like pop punk was starting to be its thing, and I remember my friends liking that a lot, and I liked some of it, but some of it I couldn't abide. It didn't have the edginess or the grit that I was becoming preoccupied with. I really like texture in music, and so then I kind of went on like a deep dive to to like earlier punk stuff and got sort of in that direction. Got really into the Clash. It kind of went like my passions were like punk and then folk and then hip hop, and in that order of exposure. And to me, I liked them all for the same reasons. I liked them all because they were very direct and gritty. That was kind of the two things that I loved about them, and verbal. Especially folk and hip hop.
Yeah, that's fair. I see mad similarities. I never thought about the folk comparison before, but I find the same thing attracts me in punk and hip hop. Also, they're like just effectively counterculture in their nature when done in the more purest form of it, as you'd say. And folk is too, kind of. Like folk was always just like the local anti, like big culture. This is our culture, and it kind of taps into that roots too. So how does
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have been able to formulate it this way at that time, but I think now the way I think of it is what those three musics have in common, and really what I look for in any music that has words in it is are the medium and the message like completely tied together. Like the whole point is to say something with the song. Like a rapper is talking to you. They have something to say to you. Maybe it's even just to make you laugh at some really smart punchlines or some, just, ravish you with wordplay or whatever. But usually there's more than that. And it's the same thing with folk music too. It's just a person talking to you and trying to transmit some information. And it's very politically engaged and philosophically engaged almost always.
no, that's fair. So this is like in a high school. How are you getting exposed to music? Is this like the internet era? Are you like downloading stuff? Are you copying records?
I wasn't very plugged in. I would go to like the local like CD store and just like look at stuff, and I would like read the liner notes of like the little info packet in the jewel cases and like find out about other artists. And yeah, it wasn't very internet based. I had a friend that I met at church. he was like because my family went to church, and this guy whose name is also we have the same name, but he was sort of like the black sheep of the church because he came out as gay, and he did not like go with the flow of the whole church program, but he knew all the music. Like he had his CD binder with him, and he had all the old like that's how I got into like the Clash and Rones and stuff like that, and that's how I found out about like other music that was connected to that. So that was like a big place where I found a lot of music in that initially.
The good old social.
The CD binder of the gay kid at church.
That's wild. Is he still go to church?
I don't know. We haven't talked in a lot of years. Our moms are still friends. It's actually long been on my to-do list to get in touch because I'm not sure if he if he's aware of the debt that I owe him in terms of my like intellectual development. Like a really very wonderful person.
That's cool that you can get the flowers like that. Do you go to church still?
You know, I just recently started going back to church in the Zoom form. I've been going to like a Methodist church because I wanted, you know, the old hymns and stuff. I kind of wanted to return to the same place, and I have, but just like in my bedroom, you know, which is where everything happens now. So
Do you like
just like as of the past couple weeks, it's funny that you mentioned that.
Do you like Zoom church?
I like that I don't have to schlep my ass to wherever church is happening. You don't get the visceral thrill of like everybody singing together, which is kind of the point. That's not there at all, at least not in this particular iteration of it. But there is something nice about you can sit there and you can listen to the sermon and you can kind of be in a meditative space that's very personal, and you can follow along with the readings and do your own sort of contemplations as you go, and even like write notes about what, you know, whatever's making you think about, that kind of thing. So there's advantages, but I think the advantages are not sufficient to make it anywhere near what church is supposed to be, which is a moment where community and the being together in space activates the presence of the divine, or makes the presence of the divine real through like your group presence, you know.
That's fair. I do believe there's a Bible verse that says that a church is anywhere where a few people gather, regardless of a physical building. So I don't know.
Yeah, where two or more are gathered in my presence, there am I also.
That's it. And
Yeah.
so I wonder if that was taking into account the Zoom congregation world. I mean, I suppose it would count, but like,
I mean, we're gathered right now, you know. So.
and it's like because we were doing like online cipher shit, right, on the Zooms, and it was like I was describing it as like 80% as good as being around a bunch of people. Like in a lot of senses, you got reactions because you would see people's faces light up, and you could kind of get into it, but it just never hit like good enough. Like that full like exact, like it never replaced it. It never like satisfied it, but it was like, you know, good enough, I guess. Good enough is more what it was rather than being really good.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a trade-off. There are certain advantages to it. I think there's elements of like, you know, especially with the dub Zoom, which was very church-like. It has been very church-like throughout its stretch of existence so far. Especially with ciphers, it's like it's kind of easier in a way. You can like learn to do it. I feel like I was seeing sometimes people who were not, you know, super familiar with the process that are like able to jump in and like hold space in a way that maybe they would have been harder to do, you know, a live environment. You know, this is recorded, which is nice.
I could definitely say that the Zoom calls for end of the week, the one thing that's different is you don't feel the presence of people the same way. Like some people be mad, like, yo, I can't even cut that guy off a little bit. But on a Zoom, you're like, it is so easy to cut off anybody by accident, way too easily. And then everybody politely shuts up for you. Because we're all on the Zoom. That'll never happen in a real person cipher.